This review covers the 1967 Chevy Chevelle Pro Street. It's Revell kit in 125 scale, and it's model kit number 85-4923.
Originally released in 1989, this boxing was put out in 2012, but it's still available on online auction sites. And fortunately, there's also a version from AMT of the 67 Chevelle Pro Street that's available right now from online sources like Target, Walmart, and Auto World. That's kit number 876, and it's very similar in design and style. And you could also use that if you're looking for a Pro Street kit that's really got a good look to it on your shelf.
Now the kit features pretty accurate assembly instructions, and it's comprised of 150 pieces, along with 4 rubber tires. And now 2 are skinny to be used on the front, and 2 massive rear Pro Street tires go on the back. They're well-detailed Firestone units, and they have also included a paint guide with the instructions that are pretty well laid out so that you can replicate the box art if you like. The parts have very little flash on them, and most of the pieces fit well together. There's a few seams and ejector pin marks, but they're minimal and they clean up easily. This is a great box stock kit, but would also lend itself well to those who like to go out and add super details. In '67, Chevy updated the body style for the Chevelle, and then they added the massive 396 cubic inch engine. Altogether, it made a perfect combination for the street racer. Here are the contents of the kit, and you can start to get an idea of how big those rear tires are from the photo here. But also note that the decals are very colorful, the registry is good, and the flames would go on just about any light or even dark color, and the silver strands, which I used for the medium blue, would go on the medium silvers to dark blues. But that means that you could paint this car in just about any color you like and still come out with some really nice decals to add to it. We'll be using Model Master's liquid cement for most of the construction, occasionally super glue for fine parts like the suspension pieces. You may want to consider some of the aftermarket setting solutions for those large decals to help them stick to the body and conform to decals. And as always, use the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when using any of the products that you see or hear mentioned in the review. Now these molds have seen some use, so you'll find some flash and ejector pin marks. Right here there's an arrow pointing to the black marker to highlight some problems I found. There's flash around the rear of the side drip moldings, and there's ejector pin marks on the underside of the roof that would be visible, so you might want to fill those in and sand them. Now there's more pin marks on the underside of the cowl, but those won't pose a problem, and some flash on the leading edge of the hood. Ejector pin marks on the underside of the hood too, if you're going to lift that for show. And there's some mold seams on top of both the front and rear fenders. All of those defects are easily handled with sandpaper or a sanding stick. After you've done the body work on that and cleaned up any blemishes, let that set and air dry, and in the meantime we'll start taking a look at the engine. The casting looks pretty good, but I would have liked to have seen the oil pan not be molded in and just added on, but nonetheless that means there'll be a parting line through the oil pan area there. Now test fit the engine halves, and note that the mating surfaces don't perfectly go together, so glue them together without fixing this would give you a gap. So sand it off smooth and flat so that all the surfaces touch each other where the halves come together. And then go ahead and assemble those pieces for a nice tight fit, and if needed, put a little clamp on there to keep it together tight. Assemble the headers. They're 2-piece units, and they go intertwined with the tubes there, and then clamp those for a good tight fit and let them set and dry. Now we can start painting some of the sub-assembly parts, and the chassis pan, for example, needs a little cleanup. Around some flash around the outside, etc. And the radiator needs some attention because there's a seam running down the exposed length on top. So use a file or sanding stick and smooth that out. And then a lot of the other parts will get painted while they're still on the sprues to keep them from blowing away to the carpet monster. And occasionally you can use some masking tape to stick them onto a piece of cardboard, for example, to paint them. It's a little easier there than sometimes trying to hold on to them with a tweezer. As you can see, the chassis, the suspension pieces, the roll cage, the headers, those are all painted flat black. And the engine, I painted a Chevy engine red, which may not be period correct, but this is a custom because it's a Pro Street, so that color gives me a nice contrast. I'll be doing something a little bit different for finishing here, as some of the pieces will get a gloss coat over the black, and then I'm going to spray them with a product called Alclad. It's a chrome lacquer, and it's great for models that want to give a chrome-like effect there. Now I'll use this over the gloss base, and the fan, steering wheel, and the fire extinguisher all get painted with that. And this is followed by the water pump, fan belt assembly, the steering column, the oil filter, the distributor, the coil, and the upper control arms. So I also sprayed the radiator and the traction bars and the coil over shocks, and lastly the headers, so to finish those up. Now that the red engine paint is dry, I painted the transmission an aluminum color, and some of the parts though that are chrome really are a little bit too shiny. So there's two ways of dealing with that, like the intake manifold here, which I just sprayed with some dull coat, which makes it look much more like an aluminum than the chrome plating that comes in the kit. After the engine parts have dried, then we can get back to construction, and I install the oil filter, detailing that by painting it white and then leaving the upper surface an Alclad chrome. Now the starter's next, and it gets detailed and installed. I used some flat black in the rear section and left the rest chrome, so it looked like one of the performance units. Now the chrome fuel pump is next to be installed on the right hand front of the engine block. I then fit the intake manifold and the valve covers in place, followed by the two carbs, which I have left chrome for now. And here's a little tip. I use a little bit of food coloring in some future floor polish to give the exhaust a little blued coloring, as if it's been heated up, and it's pretty interesting, and you can add that on in light coats to get it dark enough to be the shade that you like. I used the same anodized look on the float bowls, so I gave them a few coats to give it a nice looking finish on top there. And this is where I'm going to deviate again from the kit instructions. They want you to wait until the engine's installed into the body to put the front of it on. But I test fit the block in, and I don't see how it's really easy to do that. So I built up the front of the engine before it got fitted into the body, and also installed the velocity stacks onto the top of the engine to complete the look of it. And next I taped off the frame rails, and then painted the rest of it with the clear gloss to give the chassis a nice factory gloss look, or at least a semi-gloss look. I turned my attention to the interior parts, and the rear of the front bucket seats had some dimples in from the ejection pins, so I filled these with some spot putty, and then once that was dried, sanded the seat back smooth with some fine paper. Then I laid out all the interior components and mounted them with some tape on there so that they'd stay in place, and sprayed them with the gloss black base coat. Then after the black was dry, I sprayed the door handles and the speaker grills with some chrome. Cleaned the trim or the flash off from the fire extinguisher with a hobby blade, and then I painted that with the flat or the gloss black base earlier, and then now I'm going to paint the body red, and it's easier to flow paint into the recesses than to try and hand paint the chrome pieces later. Here's a photo of the interior bucket, except for the dash, of course, and the door cards there are installed on the sidewalls, and the seats are fitted, and then the speaker decals are put into place, and the shifter and the fire extinguisher are installed. Now the decal sheet comes with 5-point harnesses for each seat, and while they're flat they don't look too bad once they're in place. And also the decals for the door panels and speakers are pretty nice, and they look good when they're installed. The rear speakers consist of a center subwoofer decal and two 6x9s which fit into the speaker housing near the top of the rear panel area. The shifter handle was chrome kit part, but I detailed that with some flat black to make it look more realistic. Now the black can be used to detail the boot and the knob on the shifter too. And it has a small decal for the top with the shift pattern on it to be installed once the paint dries. The steering wheel gets a gloss treatment, and then painted the outer grip ring with some flat black again, and then a dot of gloss black on the center where the horn button would be. Apply the decals to the dashboard, you know, the racing gauges down below and the speedo, etc., and then put a drop of white glue on there to after the decals have dried, to give that a lens look. You'll see, as you can see here, the white glue has dried and actually forms a concave there, and it looks like a lens that was placed over the gauges. So here's another tip. The roll cage assembles fairly easily, but with the seats in place they won't go into position properly. So install the roll cage before you fit the seats into position. It doesn't quite fit between the door card and the seats, so I removed it and then put them into place once again after the roll cage was positioned. We had already taken care of most of the blemishes and any of the flash that we found on the body, so I taped the hood into position and then gave the entire unit a couple of light coats of primer, let those dry, and then I sprayed the entire vehicle inside and out with some blue nail polish. I used an airbrush, of course, at about 12 psi, and I reduced some nail polish because I like the range of colors it provides, with a 1-to-1 with an automotive quality medium temp lacquer reducer. And then I just sprayed a mist coat and then 3 wet coats to get a nice depth of color and still retain some of that lustrous quality of the nail polish. So after the decals or the paint had dried, I applied the decals to the body side stripe there, as you can see, along with the badging for the front quarters and the front and rear fenders, etc., and the Super Sport badges for the rear. They all went on very well. The decals are very nice. And if you find you need some setting solution to make it roll into some of the creases, don't hesitate, because these take well to setting solutions. Next, I used a black wash of acrylic black paint, thinned heavily with some water, and then I let it flow into some of the recesses, like the cowl there, and some of the panel lines like the trunk lines. If you get a little bit on the paint, of course, you can just wipe that off with a wet cloth after your black wash dries, with perhaps a Q-tip, and it'll bring out some contrast for the vehicle's panel lines. Back in '67, they were still using a lot of chrome on the trim, so I use a product that's called metal foil, and there's a lot of brands out there, but it's like tape with an aluminum tape with an adhesive backing, and it has a nice bright shine to it. You just cut off a piece about the size of the features you want to cover and stick it on, and then you trim off the excess with a very sharp hobby knife, and you burnish it down nicely, and it looks like chrome trim on your car. In this after shot, I took a picture of the chrome trim on the drip edge and the A-pillar in the window there. And after that was in place, I gave the body a couple of coats of nice clear automotive finish so that it would seal in all the decals and the foil into place. So now we'll go back to the suspension, and it's quite the setup with narrowed rear end and installed wheelie bars there. But the instructions have you build it a little differently. and they want you to mount the chassis pan to the body before you put the suspension together. So I deviated from that, went ahead and built the suspension in order to avoid any damage to the painted body, etc. So then I built up, mated the rear differential and the spring assembly per instructions, except that I'm not installing the coilover shocks until the rear end is in the chassis pan. Otherwise, you're off by anything at all with your angle, then they won't fit. If I didn't mention it before, make sure that when you're building your model, you scrape off any of the chrome plating or paint where you're going to glue things together so that they get a good joint. And I also noticed here the chassis mounting holes in the red circle need to be opened up a little bit to make the suspension posts fit properly. So the paint is probably not the cause of that, or might have been the cause of that. But the instructions also call for you to install the tires before fitting the suspension unit into the chassis, and that makes it a little clunky when you're trying to line up the tabs, etc., and heavy. So they'll be installed later once the gluing is done. For these pieces, I would use super glue for strength. Work on some chassis component installations. I roughed up the tread on the tires, the rear tires here, and installed those in the back end. And also I mounted the engine at this time, scrape off the glue, and it drops right onto the motor mounts there. So go ahead and glue those into position. Next we'll install the front suspension, build that up and put that into place. It's got positive locating points on the chassis. Make sure you scrape off the paint first, and then I would use some super glue on that installation. The kit glass can be installed. It's just that one piece, and I use a little Elmer's glue to put that into position. And after that has dried, we're going to locate the gluing points for the interior bucket, scrape off any paint there, and glue that into position and the body onto the chassis. Now, it all went together very well. This kit was pretty well engineered to even allow for a little paint, I think. So it's really a dream to put together. So get the grill out of the kit, and as you can see, I used some black wash to wash out the recesses in the back, and then once that was dry, the acrylic, I just rubbed the paint off of the highlighted areas to let the chrome shine through the grid there. And then I used some white glue to install the plastic headlights into the buckets, and I followed that with the decal from the sheet to accent the SS in the center of the grill. And the chrome tree also comes with a set of license plates, so I used one of the two sets of supplied decals and got those ready for later. I'll get out that rear bumper, and there's a decal for the blacked out area, so that gets applied first, followed by some white glue to install the 4 red tail lights and the 2 reverse, the clear lights there in the reverse nacelles. Now we're going to add the rear bumper assembly to the vehicle we already assembled there, and go ahead and glue that into position. Remember to remove any chrome and paint from where it's glued together there, and then add the license plate. And then I moved around to the front of the vehicle and did the same thing with the front bumper, glued that into position. It slides right in, but make sure you scrape off any chrome or paint in order to glue it into place. And then add the license tag there and bracket to the front bumper for a finished look. So next we can put the exhaust into place, and when I went to dry fit the exhaust into the pegs where they are supposed to go, I realized they're too short to reach the headers. So to remedy that, I flipped the exhaust over, and I nipped off the mounting posts, as you see here indicated by the red arrow. And then I just touched that up after I sanded that smooth a little bit with some sand sticks with some black paint. And then I refit the exhaust into position with some glue and nudged it just far enough forward so that everything made it up, as you see here in the red circles. Now we're going to detail the radiator a bit. As you know, I had painted that with the Alclad chrome, Now I masked off the fin area, and I sprayed the rest of it a gloss black, and then I peeled up the tape off, and I ended up with a very nice looking detailed radiator, and flipped that over to install it along with the overflow tank, and then I painted that overflow tank white with a black cap. The battery got a gloss black treatment with some red fill ports and silver terminals, and this would have benefited with a battery decal, but they didn't include that. So the radiator once again was installed, and all that was left was the upper and lower radiator hoses, and then add some detail painting of the velocity stacks by putting a little black wash into the center area of each of those. Well, there you have it. She's done, and overall this was a really impressive kit, and even though it's been around for a while, it's very well detailed. The quality of fit was good. The only issue was the exhaust, which is easily fixed, like just like I showed you. Clip off those tabs and move it forward a bit. But if you're looking for an iconic muscle car, this is a great one. And with even with a little flash and a few ejector pin marks, etc., it was minimal cleanup and a tiny amount of putty, and you're ready to go. Adding some aftermarket products to this and giving it a little extra detail would qualify this as a potential contest entry. So if I were you, I'd find one, buy it, and put it on my shelf. Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
This review is brought to you in part by Ryder's Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. Stop in to one of Ryder's 2 convenient Michigan locations, where you'll find a full range of the latest hobby products, supplies, parts, tools, and paint. You'll find aisles and aisles of scale model kits, RC models, model rockets, Warhammer gaming, and railroading products. Stop in at Ryder's today and tell them Doug sent you.